I don't know if you know Reverend Stephen Williams. He just retired from First Presbyterian after, I think, 40 years. Friend and his grandson used to attend the JA preschool, the Jewish preschool, with my son, and they were friends, and I think some of you had their kids there too. I love America because one day his very Presbyterian grandson came up to him out of the blue and said, "Papa, can you be a mensch and get me a bagel and some schmear, please?" This is one of the reasons I love this country. The dialogue, the understanding. When the boat carrying 41 Jews arrived here in 1733 in Savannah, James Oglethorpe gave them full rights, which doesn't sound as amazing today as it was then, but no other boat had ever come before intentionally. There were only 200 people who were Jewish in North America at this time. And so when those 41 Jews arrived, Savannah became home to at least 17% of the Jews in this country. That is amazing, and I am sure that unlike us, they, our founding Jewish fathers and mothers, could find really good bagels in Savannah. It was the Savannah River water that did it. In addition, there were only 120 of Oglethorpe's community left here, so that left us as 25% of all Georgians who were non-Native American. That's right, 25% of all Georgians in 1733 who were not Native American were Jewish. Now, one of my resolutions is restraint on jokes. So I didn't make a joke about how the 25% of Georgia, the University of Georgia football team, would not be winning many games. I didn't do that. The original Georgia colony didn't forbid Jews because no Jewish boat had ever come. They didn't even think about it. They forbade dreaded Catholics because Spain controlled Florida. No alcohol was allowed, no slavery, and of course we all know the worst of the worst was not allowed in Georgia, and that was, of course, lawyers. It also didn't hurt that the colony was suffering from a flu epidemic, and there just happened to be on the ship a famous immunologist, Samuel Nunez, who saved the colony, and it's very coincidental because both of my children have chosen that profession as well. So it's just amazing. In 1778, Savannah was taken by the British. Mordechai Sheftel, this is one of the first two Europeans born in Georgia, was taken captive. And also was a man named Reverend Moses Allen, taken captive later on the same ship. And recently, we unearthed one of his diaries, and he spoke about the relationship between himself, a religious man, and Mordechai Sheftel, probably the most religious Jewish person in America. He mentions in his diary how poorly they treated Mordechai and his son. Pork for dinner. The Jews, Mr. Sheftel and son, then refused to eat their pieces, and their knives and forks were then ordered to be greased with pork fat. It is a happiness that Mr. Sheftel is a fellow sufferer. He bears it with such fortitude that it is an example to me. When Allen jumped overboard, he escaped and made it to shore, saw someone was drowning, went out to save the man, was actually able to save the man, but he drowned. That's what kind of person he was. His body and the diary were put back on the boat, where Mordechai Sheftel ordered that the last remaining money he had be given for this man's funeral. But Captain Tate, the vicious captain, said, according to Sheftel's diaries, rebels have no business with coffins, and will refuse to give him an actual burial. This is amazing because friendships between Jews and non-Jews have been part of this country since it was before a country, which is very rare because this did not happen anywhere else in world history, pretty much. Maybe for treaties or in desperate moments, but people didn't become friends with other people from different religions. It just wasn't the way the world worked. According to David Sousa, publisher and editor of the Tribe Media Jewish Journal, the greatest day for American Jewry was July 4th, 1788, because the Constitution had just been ratified. As the Constitution was being ratified, I read Jacob Raphael Cohen, cantor in Philadelphia's only synagogue, marched arm in arm with the minister, Reverend William White, chaplain of the Continental Congress. Let's think about that. They've just ratified the Constitution. They're still worried about the future of this country, and they choose a cantor, not as good as this one, who was very prominent, but they chose him to walk along maybe one of the most prominent religious leaders in the country during this procession. The patriot Benjamin Rush even wrote, "The clergy formed a very agreeable part of the procession, thereby to show the influence of a free government in promoting charity." We proudly display the first letter by a president of the United States to a Jewish community in our museum. Washington also wrote letters to the other congregations at the time, including the one in Rhode Island. He visited there promoting the Bill of Rights, so that letter became, of course, more famous, even though ours is a lot better, and a lot better. So the precedent for religious freedom set in America began to transcend its boundaries. How do we know this? Because almost every Jew on earth today, I'm calculating certainly over 95%, probably much higher, live in a country where they vote for their leaders. Every Jew almost in the world today. Think about that. Francis Salvador was the first Jew to die in the War of Independence, but he also was the first Jewish person to serve in a state assembly, served in South Carolina in the 1770s. A Jewish person was invited to serve in the state assembly before even we were a country. Teddy Roosevelt in 1906 made Oscar Strauss the first Jewish cabinet minister. And of course, Woodrow Wilson nominated Judge Louis Brandeis to the Supreme Court in 1916. How amazing is that? 1920 is the year women were given the right to vote. Today we find almost no restrictions on Jews in this country. It's beyond belief. 9 Jewish senators, and that's a low number as we usually have more. 2 Supreme Court justices, until recently it was 3, and of course 1 professional football player, a kicker. And though we haven't elected a Jewish president yet, I happen to know as a rabbi that we will be electing one in 2068 because I am a rabbi. I just hope to live to see that day because it's going to be beautiful just to watch me inaugurate Dr. Amira Haas as she puts her hand on our family Bible. I'm not going to tell you, though, if she wins as a Democrat or Republican for another month or 2 until after the election. I don't want to influence anyone. In the book, The American Jewish Experience of the 20th Century, Anti-Semitism and Assimilation, Jonathan Sarna and Jonathan Golden speak about the remarkable opportunities given to even Jewish immigrants. In 1900, more than 40% of American Jews were newcomers, and it was just going to go higher. By the 1920s, probably more than 80% of all Jews in America were either immigrants or born from recent immigrants. That's over 80%. We went from 250,000 Jews in 1880 to 3.5 million in the 1920s. Anti-Semitism did grow, but did all of those people receive rights? The answer is yes. And what's more remarkable is those people were probably most likely our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents, a very high, raise your hand if your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents came to America during this time. Yeah, I thought so. It is very, very obvious that we were given amazing rights even though we were new immigrants. Yeah, we couldn't live in certain areas, couldn't join certain clubs, but many groups suffered far worse. Does anybody realize what 2024 is the 50th anniversary of? It is the 50th anniversary of women being allowed to open a bank account on their own. Also, 50th anniversary of a woman being able to get a credit card. Japanese citizens were interned, of course, during World War II. Poverty, illiteracy, and prejudice remain stains on the legacy of America, and of course, people of color have suffered in ways that I can't even imagine. Sometimes we speak about, though, the golden age of the Jews in Spain or the time of King David, but despite our issues in America today, America has been the best place for us in our 3,500-year history, and it's not even close. Michael Phelps winning the gold medal is America. Me coming in second is any other time in history. That's the difference. But David Sousa also wrote a piece that resonated with me perhaps more than any. He spoke about his fear for the country. In recent years, this unifying American spirit has been tainted by a demoralizing spirit of pessimism and cynicism. It's naive these days to talk about patriotism and loyalty to our nation's founding ideals. It's more fashionable or progressive to talk about the country's irredeemable flaws. Now, we all know America has flaws. It's pretty obvious. But we see people speaking about America as our ancestors spoke about the Tsar, or when they were herded into the shtetls in the Pale Settlement, or under the Inquisition in Spain. I fear that people believe it has become un-American to be pro-American. And Bret Stephens proves this in a way that is very alarming to me. He is a columnist for New York Times, the editor of Sapir, a Jewish journal, and he writes, a growing number of Americans, especially younger ones, have little to no idea of what it means to be American. They have been told many stories of the country's many sins, but fewer ones of its greatness. In a 2021 poll of 18 to 24-year-olds, 54% viewed capitalism negatively. 52% viewed socialism positively. More alarmingly, 31% of young Americans agreed with the proposition that democracy is no longer a viable system and America should explore alternative forms of government. We have come so far in our freedoms that we are free to be completely exasperated with our freedoms. It's incumbent upon us to remind ourselves and everyone else that we should concentrate on fixing our many iniquities instead of fixating on them. Think about the fact that we can go to a grocery store anytime and buy anything. Think about all the freedoms. Even our children, I think, understand it. My children, I took to the Children's Museum. Have you been there where they have the fake supermarket? Anybody been there where it's so cute? My daughter was there as the cashier. There was a kid in line, and my son was behind the kid in line next, and he did the most American things while he was waiting in line. He put his hands to his face and he yelled, "How much longer is this going to take?" That's America. Complain about what we need to complain about, even though we have so many wonderful things going on. Let's fix it from the inside. I remember very clearly the issues with Boy Scouts. Remember years ago, all these issues about LGBTQ leaders, about women in the Boy Scouts. A lot of people I knew just said, we're not doing scouting anymore. That's it. I did not believe that was needed. I thought we needed to help improve it. So I stayed as a scouting advisor, giving all of the merit badges for Jewish badges to Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And now in the following weeks and months, guess what? My daughter is going to begin meriting scouting badges. That is amazing. The list of positives on the minute book of our country continues to be something beyond even the wildest imagination of the 2,000 Jews living in America in 1776. As we prepare to vote in a month, let's remember that our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents, and basically 99.9% of our ancestors would have had loved the opportunity to despise a candidate. That would have been a privilege. They would have loved it if their candidate lost, because they knew that in 2, 4, 6, 8 years, they would vote that person out of office. That is amazing. They did not think about voting the czar out of office. Very few people in history have had the opportunity to vote anybody in or out. So whether our candidates win or lose this election, guess what? We win. No matter who wins, we win. And that's the freedom we have here. As Rabbi Joshua ben Levi stated in the Talmud, no man is free but he who labors in the Torah. And we are freer than anybody because we can labor in the Torah as much as we want in any way we want. Let's remember to venerate this country even as we work to improve it. We can take any position. There's no restrictions. It's amazing. We can be managers at Starbucks, which is a great job. Do you know managers at Starbucks get 2 free bags of coffee a week? That is quite a perk. Yeah, they had the same reaction the last time. I knew it was bad, but I had to put it in. Despite his fears, Brett Stevens has hope as I do. We have hope that we can find friends who support what we believe in. We also have the opportunity to champion the ideals that made America so exceptional. The American dream lives despite what we see. That is one of the most difficult things I see constantly. The dream is over. Let's list the terrible things about this country. In John Carlin's book, Playing the Enemy, which was rated one of the best books about Nelson Mandela, he speaks about the murder of Chris Hani, the anti-apartheid activist. Chris Hani was one of the great leaders of apartheid while Nelson Mandela was in prison. He was actually almost a surrogate son to Nelson Mandela. If Nelson Mandela, the book says, had died in prison, Chris Hani would have been Nelson Mandela. He would have been the de facto leader. His murder in the 1990s occurred at exactly the perfect moment to start an endless civil war. That's why the murder occurred exactly at the moment of the negotiations, right when fears were heightened to the greatest of all time. Hani was murdered, and Mandela, for one of the few times in his life, was despondent. This was his surrogate son. But he believed in democracy so much. Why? Because he looked to what country? Guess what country? To America. He looked to us and saw what we had, and he said, I need to put my deep sorrow on the back burner. And what did he do immediately afterwards? So as war would not ensue, he went right to radio and TV and did interviews telling everybody, these are the worst people who did this. Don't let them ruin what's happening now. And he was able to stop a civil war when one seemed almost assuredly that it was going to happen that day. Let's remember the support we have found in so many others in this country. In 1809, not this year, but in 1809, a past president, John Adams, wrote, the Hebrew has done more to civilize men than any other nation. And 90 years later, Mark Twain, probably or possibly the greatest American writer of all time, wrote, "The Jew is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains." It's Mark Twain. Let's remember from a personal point of view that 2 American Jewish boys were given the privilege of creating one of the greatest American figures of all times. Their names were Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, and who did they create in the 1940s? Captain America. 2 other Jewish boys did Superman, by the way. Captain America, created by Jewish boys, and the first comic book came out in the 1940s, and what was on the cover? Captain America punching who in the jaw? Adolf Hitler. Let's remember that our ancestors, and I think this is most important for me, look down on us today. And I firmly believe that when they look on us today, they say to themselves, our difficult lives had meaning, because look what has happened to our descendants. They have the freedoms that we could only, I would say, dream of, but I don't even think they were able to dream of the freedoms we have. Let's remember the friends of other religions who automatically treat us with dignity and respect, irrespective of our religion, and often, when they hear of our religion, treat us with more respect. The great sage Rav Shmuel teaches us that the Messianic age is going to only come when we're no longer subjugated to foreign rule. Guess where that happened first? I'm not saying we're living in the Messianic age, but I am saying we're closer now than we've ever been. We are almost living on heaven and earth, even if we sometimes don't see it. I'm going to conclude with the greatest gift, and it keeps on giving. From 1788, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Yesterday I spoke of how we are citizens of God and citizens of this country. God bless both. We don't live in heaven and earth. Our country is not perfect, but it's the most perfect place we've found so far. So if we want to make it even better, that's what we should strive to do. Perfect, not discard. Amen, and Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova, but also Shabbat Shalom. It's pretty soon. It's coming up tomorrow. We can do Shabbat Shalom.